Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
Good morning. I'm Rob Woodard. You are listening to Sunday Journal. This morning I'm joined by Gordon Waring, who is a fisheries research biologist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. He's currently studying the gray seal populations off Chatham and Nantucket. They're trying to determine the health and disease problems on that population. They are specifically studying the gray seal pups. Good morning, Gordon. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning, Bob. It's glad to be here and talk to you a bit about the research program that we've been involved with.
Great. So why don't you give me the program in a nutshell? I know that you say you're studying the pups. Like, what specifically are you trying to do there?
Okay, so we're studying gray seal weaned pups. These are the pups that have finished nursing, but they stay on the pupping colonies for about 2.5 weeks until they lose their molt, or lose their white coats, and get their dark coat, their subadult pelage. Okay, but when they're up on the beaches like that, they're basically lethargic. They're not moving because they're not nursing anymore. And so they're sort of like a bunch of puppy dogs. They're laying around. They're in the grass. They're on the beach. So we can just walk up to them and snag them. And then we get the body weights. We do some measurements of the flippers and the girths of the animal. And then after that, we have someone that physically restrains the animals, and we collect blood for health and disease work. We collect swabs. So we collect mucus swabs of the eyes, the nasal passage, and the rectal passage for different disease work. For instance, influenza virus work we're doing with people from MIT. Foci distemper work we're doing with researchers at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We also I
was just going to ask you, when you say these are pups, how big of an animal is this?
Okay, so the weaned pups vary in size. Their size is based probably on the mother's size. So the smaller ones are about 30 kilograms. Okay. And the bigger ones are about 55 kilograms.
So between about 60 to 110 pounds or something like that?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And when you say, so how are they, how long are they? Can you actually pick one of them up?
Yes, we have a special bag that we have designed, a vinyl bag that we just, when we go up to the pups, because like I said, they're pretty much sleeping most of the time.
Right.
And then they wake up when we get close to them and start snarling at us, and we just laid up the bag has a little compartment in it that covers the head so they can't come out and bite us.
Which they will do, right?
Yes.
If they had their druthers.
Oh, yeah.
They're not willingly going through with these procedures, obviously.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are you discovering? How is the pup population or the gray seal population in general doing?
Well, in general, we know the pup population, the gray seal population is increasing. We don't know what the rate of increase is. Mm-hmm. And part of the data that we're collecting from this work is the molt stage of these animals. The females have an extended pupping period, so it begins in about mid-December and it ends around early January. So our research is targeted around the peak pupping period. Mm-hmm. There's two things. One, it gives us access to a lot more weaned pups, and also it gives us an opportunity to collect more information on the different molt stages. And looking at the molt stages, we can get a better estimate of the amount of pups that are born in the different colonies. Because the other part of the work that we also do is we have aerial survey monitoring of the pupping colonies. So we try and do surveys 1 to 3 times over the pupping period and collect counts on pups.
How long is that pupping period? Is that a year or 6 months or?
Well, it's basically about 2.5 months.
Okay.
Okay, and so once the pups are done weaned, then the males are on the beach already. The males sort of surround the females. Then the males will breed with the females. Once the fertilized egg then is what they call delayed implantation. It's not deposited until about 3 months later. So basically it's a 9-month period that the embryo is growing. Yeah.
Okay.
Fetus is growing. And so it's a pretty common cycle with the gray seals.
And so you're finding with more gray seals in the area, obviously more pups.
That's correct.
And so that leads me to a question about food supplies. What impact, if any, are these enlarging gray seal populations having on the fish stocks in the area?
Well, that we don't have really good information on. We do, it's obvious from looking at both from our monitoring surveys of the adult populations, from aerial surveys, and from the work we're doing with the pups, and the fact that the number of pupping colonies is expanding and the number of pups being born is also increasing. That tells us that there's sufficient food resources available for these animals. So we're not seeing any starveling adults. We're not seeing animals in bad body condition. Mm-hmm. And so given all that, they find sufficient food. And their diet is very diverse. They pretty much eat most of the fish species that we find in this area, in New England, Mid-Atlantic areas, stuff like that. And
they also eat crustaceans and shellfish and things?
They do take some crustaceans, yeah. Mm-hmm. But they have a very effective digestive system. And so the way we obtain dietary data is two means. One is we can collect seal fecal material on beaches, and then just put that through a screen, stuff like that, and looking for the hard parts, like the fish bones, ear bones from fishes, beaks from squids, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that gives us some idea of what they're feeding on. And the other one is we have animals that are incidentally killed in fishing operations, because the animals, they play around the gear, probably forage around the gear, take fish out of the gear, stuff like that. And so the observer program, the Fisheries Observer Program, we have those people, the observers bring those animals back, and then the necropsy, the animals in the necropsy at the Woods-Hole Oceanographic Institution.
Yeah.
And then we have the stomachs, and so we can process those stomachs and also get another indication of what they're eating. And it's very diverse. We don't see, I know a lot of concern about with these gray seals, they're eating all the cod or they're eating all the flounder, but we don't see a single species being dominant in the diet of these animals. Mm-hmm. So we know they do eat a lot of the economically important species,
right?
But we don't know what the volume is or how much they eat. And
sure.
they basically, these animals, the gray seals can go out to, say, 50 kilometers from the beach to forage. They have a pretty broad foraging range, but so we don't know if, like the ones in Nantucket Sound, whether they just feed mostly in Nantucket Sound, or they go onto Georges Bank into the Gulf of Maine. Mm. But tagging data shows that these animals can move around quite a bit.
That was going to be my next question. Are you putting anything on these pups or even on the adult gray seals to track them to determine what their movements are?
Well, in June 2013, we did a different project. We captured adult gray seals in Chatham Harbor, and collaborating with people from Duke University, put on these high-tech satellite GPS tags, and they're in the process of working on that data. And we put on 2 additional satellite tags. And the animals, for most of the summer, the animals stayed around Chatham Harbor, around the Outer Cape. And then as you got towards the breeding season, pupping season, and later in the autumn, the animals moved out to Nantucket Sound more, and they spent more time in eastern Nantucket Sound. Some of the females, basically, from the satellite data, stayed up on the beach on Muskeget, which is one of the major pupping colonies. And pretty much the time that was on the beach coincided with the amount of time that is used for nursing pups, stuff like that. Then they went off the island. They went southeast of Nantucket. On the shoals, one animal swam towards Sable. So they go quite a bit. So they're capable of going all the way across from Canada and back. We have a lot of evidence from the Canadian data and our data that these animals can go back and forth, but we don't know how much.
So what attracts them to a particular area, I would imagine, is the supply of food there? Is that pretty much the determining factor in where they go?
Two things. It's food and it's suitable haul out. And for the gray seals, it's also suitable pupping areas.
So they don't go on, like, they wouldn't be on the Aquina Cliffs or something like that, because they need kind of a smooth, flat beach.
Well, it doesn't have to be real smooth and flat, because in Maine they use the islands like some of the outer islands that don't have a lot of human activity around them. And so they get up on the rocks and go up on top of the island, stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
So they can do that. They like pupping areas that are more isolated. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so the largest pupping area in U.S. waters is on Muskeget, which is basically a small island between Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Mm-hmm. All right, and then historically, also from the early 1980s, there was always been a little bit of pupping on Monomoy. But in recent years, the numbers have increased dramatically. So we had about several hundred pups that we counted in our 2013 aerial survey data, and we did some aerial flights over the same period we were on Monomoy doing the capture work, and there's approximately about 500 to 700 pups. Mm-hmm. And so it appears that Monomoy now is also being established as a very important pupping colony.
You're listening to Sunday Journal. I'm Rob Woodard. This morning I'm joined by Gordon Waring. He is a fisheries research biologist with NOAA, and he is part of a team determining the health and disease problems on the local gray seal population. They're specifically studying those gray seal pups. So when you say it's one of the largest colonies, Gordon, how many animals are you talking about here?
Okay, so
in total,
so on Muskeget, it's probably about 3,000 pups being born now.
And the adult population?
We don't have an estimate on the adult population. Okay, the traditional methods being used in Scotland and Canada is to get a good estimate of the pup population, okay? But that also requires having to know what stage the animals are in the molt stage. In other words, because, as I said, the pupping period is extended, and so if you do counts in the beginning of the pupping period, in the middle, around the peak, and then the end, you get a much better understanding of how many pups are being born. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you only do one flight, you really just a minimum count.
Right.
So there's a couple of components you have to do. And then once you have those other data, then you can go use the models to estimate what the total population is. So we don't have a good indication of the total population.
But I would think with 3,000 pups being born, is that in a year?
That's in a season, yeah.
In a season, okay. So, yeah. I mean, that seems like a pretty high number to me. I mean, you know.
Oh, yeah. So in the March, in the springtime, after the pupping season's over with, these animals, they go through a molt period. In other words, they lose some of their outer hair, and then they grow back again. And so during that period in late spring, the more of the animals are hauled out during that transition period. And so the last reported count we had for our March surveys was about 16,000 adult gray seals in this area. Okay, and that's just on the Cape Cod area. There's also the population in U.S. waters extends from the U.S.-Canadian border all the way down to eastern Long Island. We have major haul-out groups, but all of the pupping in U.S. waters is in New England, and the major pupping colonies are in Cape Cod region. And then there are smaller pupping colonies along the mid-coast of Maine. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about when you talk about how they're spread out? Obviously, do they, like, let's say that a pack of seals goes somewhere and finds perhaps a suitable beach, as you call it, in enough food. Would that then cause the entire colony to move, or how does that work? Are they do they go generally from one area to another given the seasons, or?
Well, they move around between haul-out sites. Okay, so for instance, a good example is Muskeget is heavily used during the pupping period. That's a prime pupping colony from. But in the summertime, you see very few gray seals on Muskeget. Most of them are around Monomoy and Chatham. So they do move around that way. Mm-hmm. We don't know what the level of interchange is between the pupping colonies in Maine or in between Muskeget and Monomoy. But we know these animals regionally move around, but we're not exactly sure how animals select a particular haul-out site for pupping, stuff like that. And there is site fidelity. Data from marked animals, and particularly in Canada, they marked a lot of the pups. The pups they brand the pups when they're born, so they have information when the animals come back. So animals that are branded on Sable Island, they may see them seasonally, say up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, but as adults going back to breed, they go back to Sable Island. And so there is that kind of site fidelity. Mm-hmm. Now, with the closeness of Muskeget and Monomoy, we don't know. I mean, it's only 30 miles probably between the 2 points. And so that's pretty close. So there might be more interchange between there. And so for all the pups that we capture, we put flipper tags on them.
Right.
Okay. And so if those animals show up somewhere, someone can identify them. We don't even know where these animals went to. And for this work we did this year, we put one satellite tag on one of the pups on Muskeget Island. And if you go to whalenet.org, they can actually see the tracks of that animal.
Right. That was going to be my next question. Where can people go to get more information? Whalenet.org.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, Gordon, we only have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to kind of wrap it up here. So, given the study that you're doing, what can you tell our listeners about the health of the pups in this area, the gray seal pups?
Okay. Well, first, in general, all of the animals that we've captured and sampled have been very good health condition as far as we can tell. From physical, okay.
Right.
From the blood work we're doing, the ocular, the mucus swabs we're doing, stuff like that. They're looking at tracking the influenza virus in these seals. Mm-hmm. In fact, the researchers at MIT think maybe seals are basically a reservoir for that virus.
Right.
And they're studying the ecology of it and see how it's moved around in gray seal populations,
Great.
Not only here, but in Canada and Greenland, stuff
sure.
like that.
Well, it sounds like important and interesting work. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a fascinating work. So I hope you have future success as you get out there. Unfortunately, we're out of time. This morning, I'm joined by Gordon Waring. He is a fisheries research biologist with NOAA, and they are conducting a study of the pup gray seals in the area. I'm Rob Woodard. You're listening to Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.